I mean, we're talking about fully functional, actualized cartel operations inside of the sovereign borders of the United States. And it seems to be a problem that we're not able to solve. And that doesn't make any sense to me. And like I said, maybe this is a messaging issue. Maybe the DOJ/DHS doesn't have the assets or the willingness or the manpower to attack it in this level. But I'm curious your thoughts, how we could get people to pay more attention to it. Because if you were to tell people, hey, would you support a cartel and an axis, let's use China as an example, a near peer adversary,
Yeah. Yeah.
an axis power to us, would you support them running a fully actualized cartel organization in your backyard? They say, no, absolutely not. I'm like, well, here's 30 of
Yeah.
them.
It's happening. Yeah. It's happening in your communities. And man, I can't remember if I think you and I touched on this a little bit in a previous discussion, but I think it's even more critical now. This is something that law enforcement and our administration, from a policy standpoint of a priority, I think we're covering that. We're at least getting it a dedicated priority on the FTO delineation, using military assets to support law enforcement where we can, watching that line very carefully if we're going to go into other countries. Um, but it comes back to the community awareness. It comes back to kids being educated on that through their parents, through community education groups, through law enforcement groups. Kind of like the Project Dare program, right? Where you were, community service officers at schools that we would see in high school in Santa Cruz or over here in San Jose. It's a legitimate enemy. It's an embedded enemy, and there's no way to really sugarcoat it. And I think we've gotten
Yeah.
so used to some semblance of everything at our fingertips. And yeah, we've had very violent crime in certain cities, but I think of, California, and I think of growing up in the Silicon Valley and, pretty low crime per capita for the rest of the country in some of these crazy, crazy cities, right? Where you were at in Santa Cruz County, where I'm at in Montana now. I mean, I'm not really worried about a whole lot of crime going on in Lincoln County because the smallest little infraction is going to be in the, daily paper, and everybody's kind of their
Right.
own watchdog in these smaller communities of 3 to 7,000, 10,000 people. But it's a national thing of education, brother. It really has to be that, because I'm glad you brought up China. Now that China isn't only working side by side in harmony with Sinaloa, let's say, or Jalisco, they're partnering. We
Yeah,
know,
precursors
yeah,
delivering stuff to the Vancouver
it,
ports. Of course,
it's
we don't know what these chemicals, what happens with them, but it just happens to be. And here's the thing: they actually have a legitimate argument in one way because those chemicals could be used to create other things. But let's really be honest about what they are being
yeah,
used for. So, they're working hand in hand.
they're working hand in hand, and they're working hand in hand domestically. And the triads with getting into the weed trade now is pervasive. And we talked a little bit about it, but even since our last conversation, it's ramped up where Tucker Carlson just had a documentary on his site for Maine. I mean, the state of Maine, right up there of they basically recreationally legalized marijuana like California did. They
Yeah.
used our, very poor model, which I've been preaching against since Prop 64 was enacted in the Golden State. And so the triads have come in and they've taken over rural tracts. They bought homes. They're, putting up black market cannabis in their organization. They're using EPA banned toxics, neuro agents, poisons, and insecticide pesticides that are coming from mainland China. They're using their own. They're not even using the carbofuran and everything else that the Mexicans use, but they're doing it in cahoots, right? And I mean, it's money laundering exchange of, hey, we'll do some weed trade. We really need black market money from the Chinese side. And of course, those precursor chemicals that Jalisco and Sinaloa need for fentanyl and super meth and all this other crap, China is gladly providing it. I mean, it's a harmonious relationship. And there's an end game to China benefiting from this of not only massive profits of black market dollars to convert to their money standard down the road or whenever. Um, but if we can kill 100,000 Americans a year with fentanyl, and we can get people secretly poisoned from toxically tainted Chinese grown marijuana in these grow houses, in these rural tracts all over the country, we're eroding and we're killing Americans in a silent war, in a cold war with soft power, and eroding that structure that is our enemy. We've made it clear China's not messing around, man. They're
Yeah.
not hiding what they're doing, right, Andy? We know they're headed to take Taiwan. They're making that clear that that's going to happen within the next 2 years. we're going to have to get involved. Who knows how that's going to go? And we know what they're building for. We know what they're preparing for. They are an enemy of the US. They have no good intention for you and I or any of our kids. And to know that they're in cahoots with cartels that have been floating through America now for 30 plus years, um, that should be one of the top priorities, if not priority number one. And so I completely agree with you. This collaboration they've got doesn't do anything for us. It puts everybody in danger. It's been identified, thankfully. We're hitting it where we can. We're putting more emphasis on it, but we are a long way from really pushing back the tide, I think, with what I've seen and everybody I'm working with like you.
Yeah. So this question will fall into the WAG category, also known as wild ass
Yes,
gas.
let's go.
From let's use acres. How many acres inside of the US do you think are cartel controlled? Whether it's southern border or Chinese influence, where they're doing grow operations or where they just have influence?
Man, it's huge. I'm going to take California as an example because I have a reference some data we generated during the Met years of doing all of that. And I remember when you took just the public land outdoor grows, right, in our pristine forests. This was before there was this push and emphasis on private land tracts that were rural, but they were accessible by vehicle. You had a house, maybe a farm. You put up the hoop houses, the big Bisqueen greenhouses, which Northern California, Oklahoma, they've used that model. Maine, I mean, that's where they're going. They're hiding in plain sight because they really don't have to hide. There's no penalty. So but in California at the time, we were looking at literally 100,000+ acres, at least conservative estimate. 100,000 acres of public wildlands were under siege from grows from the Mexican cartels when public land was the dominant area where they operated. So to put that in perspective, in our old state, you're in Santa Cruz, I'm over here in the Silicon Valley side. The park I learned to backpack in, where I met a game warden to really change my life. I've told you that story. Henrico State Park. It's like, I think 98,000 acres, second largest state park in California. And it's massive. And I'm like, and so I know that country. I've hiked like every damn trail. I patrolled it for a ton of years on vehicle, horseback, on foot, whatever. I go across that park when I'm in California, checking it out. And I look at the vastness of that and I go, so this is what 100,000 acres of wildlands looks like. And the cartels 10 years ago had that much of our land under siege with these poisons. Absolutely crippling when you put it in perspective. Like if you flew over it on your helicopter and you look down, it'd take a minute to get over that 100,000 acres.
Yes.
And you'd see
Yeah.
mile-long lakes, brother, and you'd see remote areas just like between where we're flying on our national forests of Montana. And so knowing that that was just California under siege, and now you look at Oklahoma, you look at Maine, you look at Michigan, you look at New Mexico, you look at Oregon, you look at Washington, Colorado, all these things. And now we're going to go ahead and add in not only the public land impacts, we're going to add in hundreds of thousands of acres, if not miles, of communities, say in Siskiyou County, under the glacier peak of Mount Shasta and Lake Shastina and all these other little communities that go on for, say, 20 miles square. And they're all run by Asian cartels in hoop houses, greenhouses, running tainted weed operations, making billions, and actually trying to become voters and establish residency to actually guide and manipulate the politics of Siskiyou County, in an American county that was predominantly run by World War II veterans that wanted to have a ranching or outdoor lifestyle upon their service, finishing up their service in the military. The most Wild West part left in California. I use it as a great example because not only of all the work we've done up there, but what it symbolizes for the rest of the country when you get a community of true American communities, of what we go to rural communities for our kids and our grandkids, and the community vibe, agriculture, whatever the case may be, whatever you're into, farming, logging, whatever, and being run out because these cartel elements are in there now. And that's happening to other states too, under the same model that California is doing. So it's millions of acres. It's got to be. I mean, it's got to be millions of acres nationally, but I couldn't put a number on it, but a couple million acres. And I'm going to say that's conservative, man.
Well, and the reason I ask is this: can you imagine the Chinese response if they discovered a few million acres controlled by an American cartel in mainland China?
Yeah.
or we're trying to influence, they would wipe the floor with every single person involved in that. And yet here we are knowingly allowing this to exist in our country with a near peer adversary.
Yeah. 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 That government structure would burn that down in a heartbeat. They put every military asset
Yeah.
and the
Oh
public
my
would have no
God.
say. And we know they have a heck of an army. I mean, I'm following all that.
Yeah.
Other than air superiority, man. th-
Well, and I'm not advocating for that, but why would they do that? Because they realize it's an existential threat to who they are and what they stand for. But yet we, and by that, not everybody, but it seems like it is impossible to get a fire lit under people's asses to pay attention to what is happening here. With the land is one aspect of it, but the entities behind what is going on in the land and the control and the influence, people are like, yeah, whatever. But I don't see that a lot on my Instagram feed, so it's probably not real.
Yeah. Or I don't have a grow house in my backyard. Or, I hear
Yeah.
about this fentanyl death. I hear it's 100,000 Americans a year, but I don't know anybody. I haven't seen my kids exposed to it. I'm in a good community. I agree with you. I think we just had it too soft. We haven't seen the impacts enough, like, nationally on every level for enough people to say, "I'm done. This needs to be handled differently. I don't wanna not talk about it. I need to talk about it. My children need to know." And I think and just given the structure of our government and the quote unquote democracy and how every side's got a say right now and everything's a debate and the divisiveness, I think it's a real hard time to come together, or it has been. I think it's getting a little better, but we're a long way from being unified enough, I think, on both sides of the political spectrum to say, "Hey, guys, this is public enemy number 1.